The accidental creative, die empty, louder than words, herding tigers, and now the motivation code. Todd Henry is one of those staple authors that us coaches live by. We teach what he writes on a daily basis. And I've been reading and following Todd for a long time. And I reached out and asked him to be with on the podcast to talk with us today. And I was really pleased that he said yes. So Todd is the originator. Are you the CEO, the creator of the Accidental Creative?
Yes, that's a great way to put it. Yes.
I just screwed up my introduction of this incredible guy. He is known as the arms dealer for the creative revolution. In other words, he teaches us how to get our best selves out. So I asked Todd to be on the podcast today because right now, if you're listening, we're in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic. It's October in 2020. The election is coming up. There is social unrest. There is so much going on in our worlds that it's really a privilege to be able to talk about our creative energies. What do we want to do with our lives when most people are just trying to survive and trying to deal with the heavy allostatic load and stress that's in our lives? I asked Todd to be on to talk about how can we actually thrive in this time rather than just survive. So Todd, thanks for being here.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
And forgive me for killing your introduction. Every accomplishment and every cool thing that you do is going to be in the show notes so people can find that. So, we're in the middle of this, and you speak in good times about how do we deal with the pressures of life, because life comes at us fast, right, to get to our best selves. And now it's even more acute. What kind of conversations are you having these days with people just about business, creativity, and thriving?
Yeah, it's funny. People talk about how things have changed so much with coronavirus. And one of the topics of conversation I've been having with so many leaders in industry is really all this has done is accelerated changes that were already happening, right? So we are now living 5 years in the future. In so many ways, whether that's working remotely, whether that's, the way that we sort of see business and technology and some of the trends that were already kind of present have just been accelerated by COVID. And so we haven't evolved to deal with some of these changes as we normally would have. Normally it would be something that happens over the course of several years and we kind of adapt to it. Businesses would adapt to it. Instead, we've just kind of been thrown into it. So what happens when we're thrown into the deep end? Well, of course, we're flailing about, we're stressed. We go through all the stages of denial, magical thinking, a sense of helplessness, it's sort of all of those typical phases that we go through. And the only thing that I've discovered that really helps is, frankly, it's the same answer I've been giving to people for a long time when dealing with uncertainty, is you have to have scaffolding. You have to have infrastructure in your life. Anything you want to accomplish in your life, anytime you want to do something, you have to have scaffolding or infrastructure to support it. If you don't have the infrastructure to support it, it's not going to happen.
Can you be more specific about? So what do you mean by scaffolding and infrastructure for life?
I mean a set of practices, a set of rituals, a set of frameworks through which you look at your work and your life. And specifically, what I've been teaching for years is a 5-fold framework: focus, relationships, energy, stimuli, and hours. So focus, how are you defining the problems you're trying to solve right now? Are you clear on the problems you're trying to solve right now? Maybe you're solving a different problem now than you were 5 months ago or 6 months ago. You thought you were solving a certain problem, but really now the problem is entirely different. And are you aware of what that problem is? Sometimes the stress in our world is the result of a lack of clarity around the problems or expectations that we're trying to resolve in our life. So as we gain clarity, suddenly that stress level tends to dissipate because, okay, well, now I've named it, which is the first step. And now that I've named it, I can actually tackle it. I can actually go after it. Sometimes it's the things that are beneath the surface that have yet to be clarified that create all of the stress and tension. And so, focus is really important. How we allocate our finite attention is critical. Relationships. I mean, our relationships have been thrown into a whirl right now because we don't have those natural relational interactions that we normally had. You're used to going to the office and stopping into maybe your manager's office, knocking on the door, having a casual conversation. Everything right now is transactional. I mean, even right now, we're talking over Zoom. There's a transactional thing. There's going to be a beginning and an end. When one of us decides it's over, we'll click end and it's over. It's like watching Netflix. Okay, boom, move on. And our business relationships are the same right now. Everything is transactional. There's very little wasted time. Usually we jump on a video call, we jump off the video call. It's very transactional. We don't have that sort of nuanced conversation about, hey, I was watching this thing last night, or hey, I was. And so we have to find ways of intentionally connecting with people. And that probably has to happen virtually right now or in some sort of safe, socially distanced way. But we need to allow the experiences of others to influence our life. And sometimes that happens naturally. It's not happening naturally right now. So we have to build practices to help us do that. Energy management is so important right now. So focus, relationships, energy is the third. We are so great at stacking meeting after meeting after meeting, especially when there's no task switching penalty, right? At least in terms of time, because we're sitting at our computer. It's easy to just stack Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting all day long, but we're not managing our energy effectively. And so what happens is we end up, some people get out of bed at 7 a.m. and they start doing their email and maybe have a little bit of breakfast, maybe get their kids ready for the day or whatever it is. And then they go back and they work and then they finish their day around 5:30, 6 o'clock, maybe do dinner with the family. Then what do? They go back and they sit at their laptop and they do a little more work. And we're just squeezing work into every moment of our day. Why? Because we can, because we're here, because it's right there in front of us. And it was always kind of right there in front of us, but at least we had the natural built-in infrastructure of a commute to work for most of us, right? And a commute home. And so there's sort of there were clear edges to our work. There are no clear edges right now in our work. And so we need to define those edges, first of all. But second of all, we have to practice pruning. We have to be really good at saying, you know what, some of this stuff probably needs to go away. I need to create some white space in my life so that I can have a sense of ebb and flow, of peak and trough, create a little bit of space for the important things to happen in my life. Stimuli. We are overwhelmed, and we were talking about this a little before we started recording. We're overwhelmed with noise right now. I mean, noise. I mean, frankly, just the Twitter feed of the president. It's like, if that's
but
all you
just,
follow,
it's not just noise. It's noise that our fight or flight is responding to because everything
right.
seems so life and death.
Exactly right. And so we have to be really good at making sure, A, that we're choosing what we're going to allocate our attention to. That B, that we're forming a cohesive narrative about what all of that means so that we have filters through which we filter that information. And I don't mean filter bubbles in the sense of like, I only listen to confirming things. No, I mean, we have to have perspective. Listen, very few of the things that are going to come across our radar are life-threatening, are going to destroy our, every day you hear from both political sides, like, this is the worst thing that's ever happened. And then somebody else says, no, this is the worst thing that's ever happened. And listen, none of that's true. The reality is, I mean, you hear people on the left saying, we will not have a country in 3 years. If, Donald Trump's like, you have people on the right saying, we will be communists in 3 years. And it's like, okay, none of those things are probably true at the end of the day, right? And you can have your political opinions or whatever, but like, we just have to be really good at establishing some perspective in our life, and not allowing, like you said, that fight or flight mechanism to kick in. But also, are you communing with great minds right now? Are you filling your head with timeless wisdom? Listen, there's always been turmoil. There have always been global conflicts. There have always been things like pandemics that have disrupted civilization throughout history. Throughout history, people have managed to find a way to connect with the great minds of history. Throughout history, people have had ways of filling their mind with valuable stimuli. Stephen Sample called it communing with great minds, right? From USC.
I'm going to slow you down for a minute because that's one of my practices, and one of the things that I've been doing in order to be sane is I spend an hour and a half every morning on my meditation cushion. Not meditating for an hour and a half, but I spend an hour and a half every day reading something wise, reading something that's not immediate to, like, I don't need to watch Morning Joe and doom scroll Twitter, right? There are other things that are going on, and that helps equip me to go out into the world and have perspective. So when
Absolutely.
you're saying communing with other people, you're saying actually pick up a book that has
Yeah,
nothing to do with COVID or politics.
that's right. And slow yourself down and reflect on it and think about what it means and think about how it applies to your work. Think about how it applies to your relationships and just realize we are in a deep stream of human history. Everything right now feels imminently urgent. And the reality is, people have been experiencing these kinds of things throughout the course of history. And does that mean that the things we're experiencing aren't important? No, of course not. Yes, there are important things that need to be done. There are important decisions that need to be made. All of that, right? But I think we can easily, like you said, we can just get in this trap of doom scrolling, whether that's Twitter or any other thing, and we lose sight of the narrative. What are we trying to do in this world? I think if more of us just focus less on the sort of doomsayers that are in our culture and more on what value do I want to create. Or most people in our world are actually good people trying to do good things. That is most people in the world from my experience. Maybe I'm naive, but that's my
Oh, as
experience.
As Brene Brown says, you can't hate up close. So,
Yeah,
you meet people of different political ilks, but then you meet them and you have a conversation with them, and we're just people,
we're just
right?
people. And we have and the thing is, like, one of the things we have to recognize too is as we begin filling our minds with when we start swimming in a deeper stream, right? A deeper stream of stimulus. And we start reading things that are maybe have a little more perspective that help us take 2 or 3 steps back. What we realize is there are agendas for our mind. There are agendas out there for where we're putting our attention. There are people out there trying to use us to accomplish their purposes, right? When you step back and you swim in a deeper stream, you begin to see the patterns playing out. And I think you just become less prone to being swayed here or there by whatever the latest scandal of the day is or whatever the latest outrage is on whichever political spectrum you are. And so I think we all need to aspire to swim in a deeper stream, I guess is what I'm saying.
Okay, so let's go on to your expertise. So let's say we it's kind of jacks are better these days. Is like shut off the Twitter, shut off the TV for a while. Slow down, get your mind centered on something better. Right now, we're talking about we still have the same things that we want to do. We want to improve our careers. We want to improve our relationships. We want to create things. Like one of the things I love about your work is that you help, you're like Stephen Pressfield. Like you're the champion for our artistic muse,
Hmm.
right? You help us build a field for our muse to play in. So how can we use this time to really wrestle with because again, our minds, I talk to so many people who say nobody's hiring now, can't change jobs, can't start anything, can't do anything, I'm just trying to survive. How can we start to make room for that creative process?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. Number one, now is a great time to take risks in a relatively low risk environment. It seems like a crazy thing to say, but what I mean is, now is a good time, like you said, not changing jobs, probably not interviewing for jobs right now, probably not out there looking for new work, but this is a great time for you to start doing maybe some side projects, playing around with new ways of expressing yourself. Find new ways of engaging the world or creating value, not for anybody else, not for a client, not for, but just as a way of taking some risks in a relatively low risk way. So
Can
this
you
is a
be more
good time.
specific?
Yeah, so side project, right? Maybe maybe you're talking to a coach who's always wanted to write a book, but you know what? There's just nobody's offering me a book deal. Well, who cares? Start writing your book. This is a great time for you to take a risk and start writing a book. Just write a couple hundred words a day. That's all I do. I write 500 words a day. When I'm writing a book, I write 500 words a day. It adds up pretty quickly. It's like a chapter every couple weeks, and then I've got a book in like 6 months. I've written and published 5 books in the last 10 years, largely because I just sit down and I write a little bit every single day when I'm working on the book. So this is a great opportunity for you to do something like that, to take a risk in a relatively low risk environment right now. The second thing I would say is we have to lower our expectations of ourselves and of everyone around us. Um, Not all, like you said, it's a privilege to have this conversation because not everybody can have this conversation right now. There are some people who literally are thinking, how am I going to put food on the table tomorrow? So we have to keep that in mind. But secondly, there are people right now who are sitting in really nice homes, or maybe there are people right now who are working remotely from their second home on the beach in Florida, right? And there are people who are working from home with 5 kids and a spouse who's also working from home, and maybe a mother-in-law who's living with them, and in a 4-bedroom house, and they're trying to figure out, and they have no space. We have to recognize and have empathy for the fact that not everybody's coming from the same situation. And we have to do that normally anyway, because sometimes, like we assume everybody generally has a life like ours when we're in the workplace. And the workplace is kind of like a great equalizer, right? We come into the workplace, we all have our desk, we all have our workspace, we all, but now we have to recognize that there are people who are really dealing with circumstances. People who have like 5 kids trying to remote learn, elementary age kids trying to remote learn, right, at home while they're trying to do their job and be on Zoom meetings and everything else. Like we just have to recognize this is not normal times, and we can't hold people to the same standards, but we have to have some expectations for them. So we have to revisit those expectations, is I guess what I'm trying to get to. Another thing I would say is using this time effectively. I would encourage people that this is a great time to be developing a skill of some sort. You should always be learning a new skill. So right now, are you learning a new skill? Are you, maybe you want to learn how to write better. Maybe you want to learn how to watercolor. Maybe you want to learn how to garden. Maybe you want to learn I don't care what it is, but now is a great time to start developing a new skill set, something that's going to keep you engaged, inspired, creatively fresh, and may even translate to your job. It's very possible.
Let me ask you a question about that, because we all know that, right? I wrote a book during COVID, right? Published it, and I'm a coach though, right? Like, so I'm surrounded by people who are going to help me do that. How do you help people? And again, I suggest that people buy your books because it's in your books. How do you suggest people take their grip off the day-to-day where they don't actually feel like they have the 5 minutes to go watercolor or watch a YouTube video of, the Stoics or whatever?
Yeah.
How do you help them carve that time to find the motivation to fight that inertia?
Yeah. Well, 2 things. Number one, you have the same amount of time that Albert Einstein had, that Nikola Tesla had, that Marie Curie had, that insert Martin Luther King Jr. had. We all have 168 hours a week. So the excuse that, well, but I don't have the time to do those things. I don't have the time to develop myself. I don't have the time. I just call BS on that. I do now. Again, I say that with empathy, because we have worked ourselves into situations where maybe we don't have that time, right? So I'm not saying that right now at this point in time, you do have the time. What I'm saying is it's because you've put yourself in a position where you don't have that time. So what I help people do.
By the way, my book is the 10 truths of how you put yourself in overwhelm. Right.
Yeah.
The first step is taking responsibility for that. So I love that you're pointed about that.
That's right. Again, you name something. That's the first step toward overcoming something, is naming it. Once you name it, you can begin to conquer it. Right. So I love that. I love that approach. And self-awareness is a first step to maturity. So becoming self-aware in the way of saying like, oh, I am actually someone who overcommits. That's a great first step as well. But what I do, I'll just share my practice, and I teach this to other people as well, is I plan my week. Big surprise, right? But like, I plan my week. On Sunday, I sit down and I look at my week. I look at my commitments, my calendar, all the tasks I have to do, the objectives for the week, which, by the way, the objectives are not the same thing as projects or tasks. Objectives are outcomes I'm trying to achieve. So I have, I think, 3 virtual conference talks I'm giving this week. So my objectives are going to be feel good. Like, an objective would be feel good about my conference talks this week. Okay. That's not a project. That's like, I want to make sure all the things I do this week lead to the outcome, the objective of feeling good about how my talks went. Right. So that's one thing. But the second thing is, when I look at my tasks, my projects, all of that, I'll sit down with my calendar and I'll say, all right, I need to this week, I need to write X number of words for a magazine article. I need to develop a proposal for this client for an engagement we're going to do. These are all things that have to happen that just aren't going to magically happen if I leave them to the whims of my schedule. So I will sit down with my calendar and I will time block those things. I will say, I'm going to spend an hour on Thursday morning creating a podcast episode because that's an important thing I have to do. I'll say, I'm going to spend an hour on Wednesday afternoon working on this proposal. I'll put those things physically on my calendar so that they're blocked off so other people can't come in and take that time from me. Now, that does a couple of things. First of all, it immediately relieves the stress of when am I going to get all this stuff done? Because once you define when you're going to get things done, suddenly that removes that uncertainty from your life. If something else comes up, it's fine. I have the time allocated to get the most important stuff done. So that's fine, right? So it does that. But the second thing it does is it really forces you to have to prioritize. It forces you to have to think about what is calendar worthy work. And if it's not calendar worthy work, is it really work I should be doing right now? Or is it work
in the Mastering Midlife nomenclature, it's called a 10. My book's called Only Tens. So my listeners know that if it's not a 10, if it's a 9, it doesn't go on the calendar. And 9.9 doesn't go on the calendar. If it's a 10, it goes on the calendar. You can do your 9s, but your 10s are the only thing that anybody cares about.
There you go. That's right. So that's a great way to put it. So, I think that has it yields tremendous benefits because it forces you then to have a sort of like reckoning, in your life about what really is going on. If you were to write down every single thing you did every single day and how long it took you to do it, and then you look back on that at the end of the week, I think you would be surprised at how many things you did you really didn't need to do and how long it took you to do things that really shouldn't have taken that long. And all of a sudden, wow, you just found an hour that you could spend developing a skill or, learning how to watercolor or investing in, your mind and studying or whatever. That time is there. It's just maybe not being spent in the right places right now.
Great. So pointed. So let me shift gears because I think I only have you for a couple more minutes. So you wrote a book called The Motivation Code, which is a little bit different than everything else that you've written. And it's more about personality testing and putting us into boxes and, so that we know what our conditioning is. What made you go in that direction to start researching that?
Yeah, I had no intention of it. So in 2016, a friend of mine who is a 20-year veteran of a management consulting firm asked me to take an assessment that he and his colleagues have been working on. He had left the management consulting firm, I think in 2009. And I didn't know what he'd been doing since then, but he'd been working with a team of PhDs who had been researching motivation for over 50 years. They're part of this research had been going on for 50 years. And so I took this assessment that they developed called the Motivation Code Assessment, and it blew me away. I suddenly saw in front of me all of these patterns that I always suspected, but I never really had words for. Places where I was deeply engaged, places where I struggled to engage, places where there's conflict in my life. I figured out why maybe it took me 3 weeks to do something that should have taken me 5 minutes to do, and why other things I'll stay up until like 3 a.m. to get them done, even though they're not really all that important, but I'll still stay up and do them. I figured out why I was drawn to certain things and not drawn to other things. It completely changed my life. And so
let me ask you, so before you even knew about this motivation code, you were a self-aware guy. You knew a lot about yourself. You're contemplative, but this gave you even more insight.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So basically what it did for me is it helped me put terms to things that I suspected, but I didn't really have terms for. So I'll give you an example. For me, my number one, there are 27 unique ways. So let me back up. My partners have figured out that after interviewing over 1 million people, 1 million achievement stories, interviewing over 100,000 people, 1 million achievement stories, figured out there are 27 unique ways people talk about why things are gratifying to them or why things are satisfying, why they're motivating. 27 unique themes of motivation. So my top themes of motivation are: number one, make an impact, which means I need to see the impact of my work. If I don't see the impact of my work, I don't want to do it. Like I am not a process guy. I have to be able to create impact and create the kind of impact I want to create. And if you bring me into an organization and you don't want what I have to offer, I'm like, great, I'll move on. I have no interest in being here. Some people are like, I'm just so glad to be part of the team, right? We call these collaborate people. They just want to be a part of a high functioning team. That's not me. I need to see impact. I'm the kind of guy who, if you invite me to a meeting to audit the meeting, within 5 minutes, I'm standing at the whiteboard, holding the marker and mapping out the next 5 years of the business, right? Even though you didn't ask me to, because that's how I'm driven. That's my motivation, right? Make an impact. Number two is meet the challenge, which I talked about writing 500 words before 9:30 in the morning. I do that because I hate to write. I've written 5 books. I hate to write. I do. I don't like the process of writing, but I turn it into a challenge for myself, and suddenly it becomes engaging because that's one of my top motivational themes. So if I say I'm going to write 500 words before 9:30, suddenly I'm engaged because that's something that drives me, you know. And my number 3 is influence behavior, which is right now you're nodding your head when I'm speaking. That's like narcotics to somebody driven to influence behavior because it shows you're listening. I'm influencing your mind, that you're agreeing with me. I could be speaking on stage in front of 2,000 people. And if there's one person in the front row with their arms crossed with a frown on their face, I don't care if the other 1,999 people are laughing and smiling and having a great time. Doesn't matter. I will walk away thinking I have failed because that one person
Totally.
didn't, you know, and that's because I'm driven to influence behavior. That's what, so I will spend my entire time focused on that one person, trying to get some response from that one person and ignore the other 2,000 people in the room. So I learned those things about myself, and it changed the way I approach my work because I saw some of those healthy patterns, but also some of the unhealthy patterns playing out. And I was able to develop some disciplines to help me get around those.
Incredible. I'm a little bit more like you. By the way, for the listeners and for you, if you can hear the dogs in the background, this is my version of having toddlers at home. We just rescued another dog, so now I'm this is the hazard of my podcast. So I'm going to actually put in the show notes how I found the website where you can take
Yeah.
the motivation code uh, assessment, which really looked different than I do Enneagram with all my clients. It looked different than a lot of Myers-Briggs and Wealth Builders, like all of those things. It just looked very useful to me.
Yeah, the way that I like to sort of informally describe it is it's sort of like a scientifically supported version of the Enneagram, right? Because the Enneagram I've found to be really helpful as a framework. But a lot of Enneagram work is anecdotal, right? It's largely anecdotal, and again, having a number of PhDs for a number of years working on validating how this language is used and how it holds together has been really helpful because we've discovered like, no, these are like these 27 themes, like that's pretty accurate. Like, I think they started with 32 or 33. And then once they looked at the data, they realized, no, actually there are 27, and so this has been sort of studied over and over and over, and all kinds of things have gone into validating this to ensure that it's accurate. And what's funny is, and we're actually doing some research now on connecting the Enneagram with motivation code, and like, are there certain Enneagram types that have certain motivation code profiles that seem to be, sort of do these things kind of hold together as well? And
They seem
so
to come from a different place though, because Enneagram is kind of what your learned behavior is. And the difference for me in listening to and kind of reading about the motivational code is um, it's what my carrot is,
right.
right? Like it's not what my automatic response is, how I act in a situation. It's what my carrot is. And
Well,
almost everybody I talk to asks, I want to know what my passion is. What is my purpose? And
yeah.
this helps you figure some of that out.
It does, but it's actually both. So there are, we tend to talk about motivation in terms of intrinsic and extrinsic, right? Intrinsic or extrinsic being the external factors, like you said, the carrot, like what's the thing that, or no, I guess it'd be the stick, right? Would be the extrinsic. What are the external factors that motivate us? Pay raises, words of encouragement, things like that. And then there's the intrinsic motivators, which are those things that naturally drive us. And, the work of Dietschy and Ryan and self-determination theory and all of those kinds of things. We tend to think about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation as two discrete things, but they aren't. They actually modify one another. So how I respond to an extrinsic stimulus is going to be very different from how you respond to it, depending on what your motivation code is, depending on what those internal motivators are. So, for example, we might both get a pay raise from the company. Well, we're both going to be motivated by that. That's great. That's going to motivate us because we love making more money. But the reason I feel like I'm motivated by that is going to be because I'm driven to make an impact. So that money to me doesn't just signify a raise. That money signifies that I am creating impact. That's what it means to me because that's how I respond to external stimuli. That's part of my motivation code, right? Whereas maybe for you, it could be this, let's say, and I had a podcast interview the other day with somebody who's one of their primary themes was evoke recognition, which means they love when other people recognize the work that they do. It's important to them that other people recognize the work that they do. So for them, the pay raise might mean, like, the money might mean less than the fact that their manager called them up in front of the group and said, "Hey, we just want to let you know that so-and-so is doing a great job and we really appreciate all the work that they've done." That means more to them than the extra money that they get. Now, the money's fine, but
Right.
it's what that money symbolizes that matters more to them than it is the money itself. And so that's why this is so useful, because especially as managers or as coaches, right? Because you're working with coaches, as managers or coaches, once we understand what it is that really drives people, we can communicate in a much more meaningful way with them. We can animate them in a much more meaningful way. We can get them to adopt habits in a more meaningful way. So if you want to get me to do something, just because Meet the Challenge is my number two, just come to me and say, "Todd, I don't know if this is possible, but," and I'm already in, like, I'm already there, right? Before you even finish the sentence, because you've just triggered my Meet the Challenge motivation. So once we understand that, we can have a more meaningful conversation.
Yeah, it's so interesting because for me, I think one of the most satisfying things is when a client renews with me. I charge a ridiculous amount of money to work with me, and so when someone hires me, that's awesome. When
Yeah.
someone renews after we've worked together for a year and they want to give me money again, and I ask them, so what did we do? What was the impact? And I find that out. That is so much more important to me than anything. I am so humbled by impact.
Yeah.
So I definitely see that as an interesting thing. So I'm going to go take the motivation code assessment myself and find out more about me.
Wonderful.
So you got this book that you're promoting.
Yep.
What else is interesting going on in your life that you want to tell people about?
We are trying to hold our life together right now as a family. We're really sort of we have our oldest is a senior in high school, and so we're going through all the college stuff, with our oldest, and our younger two, all of us are back in school. All the kids are back in school. So, like, physically at school. So wearing masks and social distancing and stuff, but that's been really interesting.
Mm.
So that's been the biggest part of our world right now, is just kind of adapting to what's probably going to be reality for us for a period of time. Again, to go back to we all deal with things in a different way. I think, the sort of magical thinking thing of like, oh, it's all going to be over by the end of the year. Probably reality is, we hope for the best and we prepare for reality.
Mm.
We have, I think, optimistic realists are the people who change the world, the people who have a positive vision and are working toward that, but also at the same time recognize what it's going to cost them in order to get there. I think those are the people who change the world. So, that's what I'm trying to do right now, is just keep sort of like an optimistic pragmatism about life.
How many kids did you say you have?
We have three.
Nightmare. I have two grown kids. I have one kid in Israel and one kid in Dallas, Texas, who's engaged. So, like I'm wondering how anybody is surviving. We talk about, let's be creative, let's do new things. And I'm wondering how people with kids at home are surviving. Every time I talk to someone, it just horrifies me. If I was home with my two boys, so, they're off on their own. Todd, I could talk to you for hours. Your work, and whether you like writing or not, is as impactful as any. And I really come this jaded, as impactful and useful and insightful as anything I read. So I really appreciate you actually spending time with us and talking about what's going on today and bringing that expertise.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks for having me on.
So I'm going to put a link to all of Todd's books. I think, like I said, I think they're all worthwhile, and the assessment, and to his website, so that you can actually have him come talk at your organization virtually, probably, for the foreseeable future. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you.
To everybody else, I love you. Take care of yourself and have a great rest of the day.